Hello and welcome back. I'm going to be doing another Coleslaw of My Consciousness review version. The book that I'm going to be reviewing today is called Truly Madly Guilty by Leanne Moriarty. So I basically just wanted to share some of my thoughts on it, kind of go through some different things. There won't be much that isn't spoilery, so for starters, I did find this to be a very riveting and somewhat addicting book. I spent several nights just reading very late into the night, not wanting to put it down, so I definitely recommend it for that. Now on to more of a discussion of things that'll probably get into all kinds of spoilers. So I wanted to start a little bit talking about some of the characters. I did like most of the characters, and they did feel very fleshed out and very believable and very human to me. And I thought it was very interesting too, because I could see facets of myself in almost every one of them. So I'm just going to focus a little bit on the main four characters. So first we have Clementine, who is a cellist. Actually, like me, I play the cello too. So that was one of those fun little connections of, hey, that's a bit of me in there. And she's much more serious about it than I am as a cellist, though, because she wants it as a career and is working at it as a career, whereas I just do it more as a hobby. I started way back in elementary school, and I've kept up playing a little bit, but it's been like more of a, I really enjoy playing this, and I sort of picture myself someday being in a famous orchestra or whatever, but I do not have the mental capacity to motivate myself to practice enough for that kind of thing. So cello is just my hobby. But that kind of gives you a bit of Clementine's personality, that she's a very serious cellist. She has a fairly serious go-getter personality in that way. And then we also have Erica, who is very relatable to me on a social level, because whether I want to or not, I can't socialize with the same efficiency as other people. And her thoughts of, okay, I have to insert this kind of joke here, and how do I insert this sort of casual, like joking, natural tone into my conversation, and all her thoughts trying to process conversations, totally like me. I do the same thing. I'm like, hey, look, I just made a joke. How do I keep that kind of personality going? And she does the same sort of thing. I totally overanalyze how I should act and respond in any kind of social situation, which is very much what she does too. I also thought that it was interesting that she's a kleptomaniac, but only towards Clementine's things. So she has a mom who's a hoarder, and so I think that's part of where like the kleptomania stems from. But it's just interesting that she's got kleptomania, but only towards Clementine, which I've never really seen as a real person thing, but I could totally see that being the kind of psychological issue that people would build up, because we're all weird like that and have our own weird little idiosyncrasies that just stand out like that. And then next, on to the main men. We've got Sam, who is Clementine's husband, and I feel like his withdrawal from the relationship after the big event of the story echoed some of my own experiences, where it's much easier to disconnect from a situation rather than trying to open up or cope in any other way, but you still find yourself obsessing about it over and over in your head. Yeah, pretty much. I've had some big events in my life that I handled the same way, where I was like, I'm just cutting myself off from this thing, but then I keep obsessing about it in my brain, and I don't know how to get past that obsession. So I totally relate to Sam, and I thought he was an adorable father, and it was great that he was so interested and into the kids, and he seemed like the kind of guy that you really would want as like a partner in life, because he seemed to do so well helping Clementine figure out her recitals and things and how to get practice in even with the kids. And he was just a cool all-around guy, really. And so it was unfortunate that he had that withdrawal, but that they were eventually able to overcome it, I thought was really cool. And I'm glad for them that I wanted Clementine and Sam to stay together, because they seemed like a really good pair for each other. And then next we have Oliver. And he did feel very much like a real human being, like the others still, but I do think I had the least connection with him, as I don't feel like I have a lot of that sort of OCD tendency that he does. He's rather like Erica in a lot of his social connections, so there is that. But yeah, there wasn't as much that I felt like I related to with Oliver, but he still felt like a very real person. The one major thing that I would say that I could relate to with him is that I am also one of those people who is very quiet and doesn't really rage about things even when upset. Except for when pushed over a limit, there is that point where I will get ragey and upset. But as a general rule, you probably won't see much difference in my happy versus my sad versus my angry, at least physically outwards towards people. So that's kind of my brief discussion of all the characters, or at least the major ones that you deal the most with within the story, and just some of my basic thoughts on there. There's probably not everything that I wanted to discuss there, but that was the main points that I could think of. So next, let's move on a little bit into the story structure. So I did love how the story was structured. It was really cool the way that you can tell there's this big event and they'll reference this big event, but there's basically no foreshadowing to what the event actually is. And so as you're getting like the little tidbits that lead up to it in the back, in the flashbacks and all that, I was picturing something completely different and guessing at something completely different than what the actual event was. And I was like, this is the coolest way to structure a story I've ever seen. It didn't really feel like a red herring, that it ended up being something else. It felt like this very naturally could have gone in the direction that I was picturing, and that it took off into a different turn instead was really kind of cool. And an interesting way to it, because it looked like it was leading right along that path, but then a different event happens and completely derails the thing that you thought was going to be the thing, at least in my case. And so that was really cool. I will say that although this worked really well for most of the book, towards the end the flashbacks were slightly heavy-handed, and I didn't need quite as many towards the end, I felt like, as there were. But that's okay, because, you know, we got all our teasing intrigue with the flashbacks, and then once the climactic event is actually expressed in a flashback, I didn't feel like I needed quite as much of the repercussions that followed. I just wanted to see how the characters then resolved it, which you got too, but you got flashbacks amidst them resolving things that not all of them felt like they were relevant or necessary. So there's that. But it was a really good way to keep you engaged in the story, and that's a very large part of why I spent several nights just reading late into the night trying to get through this book, because it was so addicting to have this style of, here's the story, you can tell the event has affected them, but they don't want to admit what the event is, so you have to go back into the flashbacks to find out what the event is. And it was really cool. And eventually, like in the current selves, they do admit it and stuff, but not until the event has been expressed in the flashbacks, which was really a cool way to do it. But since we're talking about that, and I've already talked about spoilery things, let's get a little bit into what all these actual events were. So the main thing that happens within the story that is their huge turning point for all these characters is that they go to a barbecue. Originally, it was going to be Erica and Oliver inviting Clementine and Sam over just for a private, like, family-ish style dinner. And then Erica and Oliver's neighbors, Vid and Tiffany, find out about Clementine and Sam coming over, and are like, oh, hey, let's all just do a big neighborly barbecue together. And we do that. And so some history on Tiffany is that she used to be a exotic dancer, for lack of a better term. And so based on that character, that was kind of the direction I thought the event at the barbecue was going to be. I was like, oh, there's all this sexual tension building up in weird spots between the different group members. Vid and Clementine are kind of hitting it off, and Sam and Tiffany are kind of hitting it off. So I thought there was going to be this weird, like, sexual event that happened as the big thing at the barbecue. But no, Sam and Clementine actually have two little girls who are playing and came along to the barbecue and all that. And in Vid and Tiffany's backyard, where the barbecue is being held, there's also a giant fountain sculpture thing. And one of the kids falls into that fountain. So as the adults are all getting all riled up with this sexual tension and stuff, one of the kids falls in the fountain and almost drowns and dies. She does not die, fortunately, and all that, but that's the huge turning point. That's this big event that offshoots the rest of the novel. So I thought it was a really cool build up, that it was like, oh yeah, you can see how it's leading into this weird like sex thing that's gonna happen. But no, it was instead a child almost dying from drowning. So I thought that was a pretty cool way to adapt all of that. And it was written so well, at least because of how wrapped up in the story that I was, that when their daughter actually fell in the fountain and was discovered there, I was like, oh my gosh, did she die? And I just didn't notice because there were these flashbacks that were written into the story beforehand, and I just didn't realize that her character hadn't been referenced. Not the case. Daughter did survive, but I think that that's a pretty well written story when it can throw that kind of loop at you and have you have that moment of, wait a minute, did I just not notice that this thing happened and that it was there all along? And so I thought that was really great, and that because of how the flashbacks were woven in, it was very convincing that she could even be dead. That was crazy. So yeah. Anyways, a few other things to discuss. I did like the very human element to the story, and that each character had to take their own turn to know why they felt guilty over the incident. Even the kids had their own guilt over it. Vid and Tiffany also had a daughter who was a bit older than Clementine and Sam's and had been semi-babysitting them during the barbecue, but then wanted to take a break and go read a book up in her room. And so she blamed herself that the girl fell into the fountain because she wasn't there watching them anymore. And then the older sister of Clementine and Sam's also felt guilty because she thought she'd pushed her sister into the fountain, and that's why she was drowned, you know. So it was interesting that even the children had this guilt over it, and all the adults had their own various guilts. Oliver and Erica had been out of the room at the time. Oliver had been in the bathroom, and Erica had been going to get something from the kitchen. So neither of them was there to see the event happen, and they felt guilt over that. And then you've got Sam and Clementine, who have been busy having basically this flirtatious conversation with Vid and Tiffany, and they're like, oh my gosh, we got so distracted, how dare we do this to our children? And so it was just cool to see all the different ways that guilt can affect people, and how in the same exact situation guilt can reflect onto everyone, which I thought again was a very human way to have addressed this situation, because in similar circumstances I feel like everyone would find some sort of guilt on themselves in that case. So I thought that was really great. There is one other big thing to address in the story. So we talked about how originally it was going to be a barbecue with just Sam, Clementine, Oliver, and Erica. Or not even a barbecue necessarily, but some sort of like close-knit family style meal between them. And this is because Erica and Oliver, who don't have children, have actually been trying to have children and have been attempting IVF treatments. And they haven't told Clementine and Sam because it's a fairly private thing for them, and it was just kind of their agreement that we don't want to talk about this right now. But after trying so many treatments, they were looking into just getting a donor, since Erica's eggs were bad or whatever. And so they were going to ask Clementine and Sam if they would mind donating Clementine's eggs so that they could have a baby. They wanted it to be what they discussed at that dinner, and because of the Vid and Tiffany thing coming up, they end up discussing it briefly before the barbecue, and this in turn then leads into some of all of the adults' guilt, because they're like, oh my gosh, if we hadn't have had that conversation right then before the barbecue, would we have been better able to watch the children, kind of a thing on top of it, and all of that. So yeah, it was one of those interesting things, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit too, because it shows the contrast between both couples' feelings on children, and it's even a bit stereotypical but opposite of how a lot of this would generally be portrayed, since women are generally the ones who are like, baby, 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 and men are like, meh, not so much. But in this case, both Erica and Clementine are not as interested in getting pregnant. Clementine loves her 2 kids that she does have, but Sam has been talking about a 3rd baby, and she don't want that. And Erica, just in general, has not really wanted to have kids at any time, but she's willing to do it for Oliver. So yeah, but Sam, again, he's like, I want a 3rd baby. And Oliver's like, I think we should have a baby. So it's stereotypical that there's kind of that dynamic of one wants it and the other doesn't. But in the reverse gender roles, which I thought was a fun way to look at it. And again, helps it feel more human because we're not just doing a complete stereotype, we're showing that every human being in any gender can have all these different facets and relationships to these issues and ideas. So it just, anyways, lots to talk about here. But like addressing the IVF aspect of it, I think for me personally that I wouldn't have asked a close friend like that. I do applaud Erica for feeling like she could ask that, but I personally don't think I could ask a best friend for eggs. It would be very weird for me to know that this is essentially the mother of my child, and especially if it's like a best friend or something, to be looking for their features in your child and being like, is this child going to become more like my best friend than like me and have more influence from them than from me? And there'd be all kinds of weird naughty issues locked up inside of it for me, and I don't think I could do it. So I think for me personally, I'd prefer not knowing who the donor is, so you're not constantly looking for all of that. But yeah, that's how that goes for me. But so and then with that being my feelings on it, I totally understand Clementine's initial reaction to it, where she was like, I can't do this, I don't want to be the mother of her child. She did also say that she was repulsed by it, which is not just the IVF thing, but in part her relationship with Erica in general, because they were almost forced to be friends by Clementine's mother because of Erica's mother's hoarding and stuff, and Clementine's mom then wanted to give Erica kind of a safe haven and a friend and all that she didn't feel like she was getting from her own home. So there's that aspect to it too. But I totally understand Clementine not wanting to be the essential parent of her friend's baby. She has kind of the same feelings about it that I do, that you'd then be looking for like yourself and the child and all that kind of thing, and it would just be weird. I personally couldn't do it. But yeah, so that kind of addresses, at least on a basic level, all of those things that are tied up in that baby issue within the novel, which I think was interesting to have that tied in as well. Because, again, with like the flashback setup and stuff, even in the after barbecue events, Erica and Oliver keep having these conversations of, we've got to talk to Clementine, we've got to talk to Sam, we've got to find out what's going on. And so you think it's just related to whatever the event was at the barbecue, but then as you get the flashbacks to draw closer and closer to the barbecue itself, you're like, oh, there was also this event where they asked about these eggs, and that's actually what they're trying to get an answer on. And it was just cool to see how it was all woven in. I really like Leanne Moriarty's style, and I think she did a great job of weaving all the different threads of her story. It's great. There's one final thing in relation to that I want to talk about. It's heavily referenced throughout the novel that it's been raining pretty much since the barbecue, until all the events in their lives are essentially resolved and they're kind of sinking back into more of a normalcy period. And I thought that was a really cool metaphor to throw in, because they keep having these conversations, at least in their head, about how before the barbecue everything was normal, this extraordinary thing happened, and now even the normal doesn't feel normal anymore. And the rain kind of was a good representation of that. It was like, before the barbecue there was sunshine, there was normal, and then the barbecue, and then this rain of all this crazy stuff happens, and we don't know how to cope with it or get over it and all of that. And so the rain became a really cool metaphor for all the issues that the people are struggling with. And the rain finally clears when everyone's issues in the story are cleared as well. So I don't know if in reality it'd be possible for it to have rained for as long as it did in the story, but I really liked its use as a metaphor within the story. So the rain didn't go away until the gloom and guilt went away, and it was just beautiful. So I think that's all my major thoughts, just as a review style thing on this story. I'm also wanting to do one more video about this book, because Truly Madly Guilty also has some discussion questions at the end of it. And so I think I'm going to also do a video where I put up my answers for that, and then maybe there will be comments and discussion on that video and stuff, and it'd be really cool. But anyways, that's basically all my thoughts on it. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and look forward to seeing if anyone else has read this and has any comments they'd like to share about it. And I think that's all for now. So this is the Umlaut Herper signing out.